I'd like to introduce Rachel Stukenborg, our presenter today. Rachel is a Master of Engineering student at Duke University and a summer intern with Let There Be Light International. She has done extensive research in the field of energy poverty and renewables and is joining us from North Carolina. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning or evening, depending on where you're listening from. It's great that we've got people listening from all around the world. As Sarah said, my name is Rachel Stukenborg. I'm a master's student at Duke University studying mechanical engineering, concentrating in energy and fluids. And I'm also an energy poverty summer intern with Let There Be Light International. And Let There Be Light International, for those who aren't familiar, is a nonprofit that works to improve access to safe, healthy, and reliable lighting in sub-Saharan Africa, prioritizing vulnerable groups like handicapped, elderly, and orphan children, and new mothers. Let There Be Light International partners with local NGOs to distribute solar lights, solar electrify health centers, and host free educational forums on the benefits of solar. I'm thrilled today for the opportunity to contribute to their mission and share some information on energy poverty with all of you from both my own background and from Let There Be Light International's collected data. I also want to thank all of you who are calling in from somewhere with an unreliable connection. I know how frustrating it can be when the Zoom connection is spotty. So for that reason, as Sarah said, we are recording this and that will be made available to you afterwards. And for those who might have joined over the last minute, we are just asking if you could remain muted until the end, and there will be an opportunity for questions and comments at the end. All right, so to start, what is energy poverty? The formal definition of energy poverty is the lack of access to electricity and clean cooking fuels. On the electricity side, it was measured in 2017 by Practical Action that 840 million people across the world lack access to electricity, and that's 11% of the global population. People without electricity rely on fuels like kerosene and candles for lighting, as shown in the image to the right. And this is primarily a problem in sub-Saharan Africa. However, there has been some progress. Just in 2010, it was measured that 1.2 billion people didn't have access to electricity. And this really speaks to the solvability of the problem. The other half of the definition is the lack of access to clean cooking fuels. When someone doesn't have clean cooking fuels, it means they're relying on inefficient and polluting cook stoves and traditional biomass for cooking. And traditional biomass includes firewood, charcoal, peat, and animal dung. This problem is slightly a larger problem than the lack of access to electricity. In 2017, it was measured that 2.9 billion people didn't have access to clean cooking fuels, which is 39% of the global population. And this is primarily a problem in developing Asia and rural sub-Saharan Africa. There has been some progress on this issue, but not as much as the lack of access to electricity. In 2010, it was measured that 2.96 billion people didn't have access to clean cooking fuels. And the lack of progress is largely due to cooking being a sticky problem, meaning that cooking is closely tied to cultural practices. Eating is integral to any culture, and it's difficult to introduce changes even if those changes are healthier. Comparatively, everyone wants electricity and lighting in their home, and not having lighting isn't tied to culture, it's just a financial health and safety burden. There is a hypothesis at Let There Be Light International that access to clean lighting could be a gateway to access to clean cooking, but more research is needed to prove that. So why is it important to have access to clean cooking fuels and electricity? Well, it's because energy is used in everything. It's fundamental to human life. That includes basic human needs like cooking, lighting, heating and cooling, and obtaining drinking water. Everyone is meeting their basic human needs using some form of energy. The difference comes in what type of fuel they're using. Energy is also fundamental to developmental needs like education, health services, communication, and transportation. These services improve as the quality of fuel improves, And some of these needs aren't even available to people, which is needed for computers and internet connectivity. And there are many consequences correlated with the lack of access to electricity and clean cooking fuels. I'll go more into depth on this later, but I just want to give an overview of the different sectors that it can impact. Health is impacted from the use of indoor air, or the use of inefficient fuels that cause indoor air pollution. Safety is a problem from open fires in the home and lack of lighting. Education is impacted because without adequate lighting, students cannot study into the night. And advanced form of communication and transportation is not available. It also impacts the global community through climate change. The collection of biomass and the use of biomass in clean cooking fuels causes deforestation and desertification, and burning sources of fuel like biomass and kerosene also release greenhouse gases. And all of these problems together, all of these correlated consequences, are why energy poverty is an energy crisis. So the formal definition of energy poverty is the lack of access to electricity and the lack of access to clean cooking fuels. But that definition is binary, meaning it implies that everyone falls into one of two groups. Either they have access to electricity and clean cooking fuels, or they don't have access. And having just those two groups makes this very difficult to measure for many reasons. First of all, it doesn't account for different technologies providing different types of access. For example, a health center could have access to grid electricity, but if the grid is unreliable, they're susceptible to blackouts and brownouts. And this could limit their access to lighting, even though they technically have access to the grid. Furthermore, having access doesn't always mean that needs are met. For example, someone might live in an area where a grid connection is available, but if they're unable to afford the cost of electricity, they're not able to have electricity in their home. And this is a concept we'll talk more in depth later, but it's known as the affordability gap. So there have been a few frameworks introduced to account for the limitations of this binary definition. And the first of these is the multi-tier framework, which was developed by the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. And the multi-tier framework introduces tiers of access, as you can see in this image. And these tiers account for different fuels and technologies providing different levels of access. So as shown in the image, as the tier number increases, the quality of fuel source increases, and the number of hours in which the fuel source can be used per day increases. The availability of advanced energy appliances also increases. And this framework can be used to evaluate different levels of access and determine where energy needs are met and which ones need improvement. And the multi-tier framework is divided into one framework for cooking fuels and one framework for electricity. And I know this is kind of hard to see and the font is small. It's not my intention that you read everything on this slide. I just want to give an idea for what these tiers and frameworks look like. As you can see, there are benchmarks for someone to move up a tier. The benchmarks include things like indoor air quality, efficiency, safety, and affordability. And for example, in the electricity framework, to move from tier 0 to tier 1, a household must have access to electricity for at least 4 hours a day total, with 1 hour being in the evening. Another framework introduced to better explain energy poverty is the energy ladder, which is developed by the International Energy Agency. And the energy ladder incorporates income into explaining energy poverty. As you can see on this graph, the energy ladder states that as income increases, energy consumption increases and more sophisticated forms of energy are used for more advanced appliances. This can also be said the other way, that as energy consumption increases and more sophisticated fuels are used, income also increases. And it really shows the correlation between economic poverty and energy poverty. Another useful tool in understanding energy poverty is the concept of the affordability gap, which is also developed by the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The affordability gap is the difference between market prices of energy and what people in extreme poverty can afford. And because of this gap in affordability, many people living in extreme poverty are left out of market-based solutions to energy poverty. And the affordability gap creates the need for what's known as energy safety nets, which are government-led approaches to improve access to modern energy services for people in extreme poverty by decreasing the affordability gap. And government funding isn't always available for energy safety nets. So in its absence, LTBLI International and other international partnerships can support social safety net programming. So now that we have an understanding of what energy poverty is, I wanted to introduce my background in it. I was first introduced to the problem in a university course on global energy problems. And I remember when I was first learning about energy poverty, I was shocked that I hadn't been more aware of it as someone who had been studying energy for years at that point. And that led me to pursue an interest in this field because it allowed me to combine my passions for energy engineering and alleviating poverty. At the end of my undergrad studies, I completed a senior thesis with a project partner, Caitlin Tomlinson, where we researched trends in energy poverty and created educational tools on them with the goal of improving overall awareness. And our project was titled Energy Poverty SOS. And SOS in this stands for Science on a Sphere. Science on a Sphere is a presentation tool developed by the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And what Science on a Sphere is essentially a globe in an auditorium surrounded by 4 projectors. And the projectors can project one cohesive image onto it. And you can see this in the picture in the bottom right corner. It's very useful for showing global data. And for this reason, we decided to develop world maps containing data on energy poverty that could be projected onto Science on a Sphere. We entered our created maps into a content creation contest for Science on a Sphere, and it was selected as the winner, which allowed us to present our research at a national conference. And it was also published in the Science on a Sphere data catalog, which made it available to all Science on a Sphere users as open source content. So we really got to see our goal come to life of improving awareness on energy poverty. And Science on a Sphere is available in 142 locations in 26 countries, primarily in museums, science centers, and universities. So it has great potential to spread awareness. And spreading awareness was the primary goal of the project. We really wanted to highlight the relationship between energy poverty and economic poverty. The maps can be divided into 2 different types. The first are maps showing the definition of energy poverty, like the lack of access to clean cooking fuels and the lack of access to electricity. And the second type of map can be defined as the correlated consequences of energy poverty, like rate of education completion. So the next few slides, I'm going to show you some of the maps we created in a 2D format. Unfortunately, I don't have the capability to show you the 3D projections of these, but I do have a 2D format of all the maps we created. So I'll be showing you those. And all the data is taken from World Bank or CSIN, which is Center for International Earth Science Information Network. And I do want to note, this project was completed in 2017. And at the time we used the data that was most up to date, but now it is not the most up to date. And that's just due to improvements in energy access and data availability. So while the numbers have changed, I do want to say that the overall message is still very relevant. And the message is that where energy poverty exists, economic poverty and other correlated consequences also exist. So to start with the definition of energy poverty maps, here we have access to clean cooking fuels. So this map is showing country level data of the percentage of population with access to non-solid fuel. And access to non-solid fuel means that someone has access to more advanced liquid or gaseous fuels for cooking. So if someone is relying on solid fuel, they're relying on biomass. It's like firewood, charcoal, peat, and animal dung. And biomass is inefficient, time-consuming to gather, and contributes to indoor air pollution. So as you can see on the darker colors on the key, those are correlated with the least access to non-solid fuel. So where the darker colors are, people are primarily depending on biomass. And as discussed in the introduction, this is primarily a problem in sub-Saharan Africa and developing Asia. This is a map showing the second half of the definition of energy poverty, which is lack of access to electricity. This is showing country-level data with percentage of the population with access to electricity. And again, the darker colors on the key indicate where there's least access to electricity. And as mentioned before, this is primarily a problem in sub-Saharan Africa. And here are two maps that provide a meaningful comparison for the definition of energy poverty. Nighttime lights and population density. So the nighttime lights map on the left was developed by NOAA using data from the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. And it's basically a compilation of satellite images taken at night that show lights generated by electricity. And on the right, this is a map developed by my project partner and I. It's population density across the world, with darker colors indicating the most dense population. And in a perfect world, you would expect Earth's nighttime lights to line up perfectly with population density, but this is not at all the case. Sub-Saharan Africa, while having a very dense population in the map on the right, is almost completely dark on the nighttime lights map. And this really speaks to the gravity of lack of access to electricity for lighting in Sub-Saharan Africa. So now we're moving on to the second group of maps, which are maps showing correlated consequences of energy poverty. And for each of these slides, I included one of the maps we already looked at on the bottom, which is lack of access to electricity, for a useful comparison. So here we're looking at health and safety consequences correlated with energy poverty. And we're using infant mortality rate as a proxy for that. And this is showing number of infant deaths per 1,000 live births, which is a valuable proxy for overall health. It encompasses a lot of things like clean fuels, or access to clean fuels, availability and quality of healthcare, and maternal health. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, one of the leading causes of death in children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa is pneumonia, which is a common side effect of indoor air pollution. So comparing these two maps shows that where infant mortality is the highest, it's also the areas where energy poverty is most prevalent. And energy poverty can impact health in many ways. To name a few, burning dirty, inefficient fuels, like biomass and kerosene in the home, releases indoor air pollution. And over time, exposure to indoor air pollution can lead to a myriad of health problems, like respiratory infections, lung cancer, heart disease, cataracts, and low birth weight in babies. And this is extremely dangerous right now because studies are showing that people with pre-existing respiratory conditions are at increased risk for complications with COVID-19 infections. Open fires in the home with burning candles and kerosene are also health hazards, and burns are very common. According to data collected by LTBLI International, 90% of solar light recipients lived in fear of burns due to kerosene or candle use. Mosquito bed net usage is also low when there's an open fire in the home because mosquito bed nets are incredibly flammable. So many people choose to forego bed net use because of the risk of fire in the home, which increases the risk of mosquito-borne illness. And then finally, lighting at night, or lack of lighting at night, also causes poor community safety. As shown in this image on the right, the child's using a donated solar light to make her way to the latrine. And without that solar light, she's not able to look out for hazards in a task as simple as walking to the latrine. Another correlated consequence with energy poverty is the completion of education. On the top map, we're showing percentage of school children that graduate from primary education out of the total population of students that started in the entrance level. And the key is showing that where the darkest colors are the lowest percentage of primary education completion. And similar to the previous maps, where there is the lowest levels of education completion are also the areas that are impacted by energy poverty. And there are many reasons that education completion rates are low in these areas, and energy is just one factor. But energy poverty can affect education completion in many ways. Without access to reliable electric lighting, students cannot study and do homework during the evening hours, which means they have less time to dedicate to school and are less able to succeed. Some forms of fuel, like kerosene used for lighting, are also very expensive, which means that sometimes families have to decide between paying expenses for school or lighting their home. And furthermore, electricity is needed for improved educational resources like computers and internet connectivity. And this image I found very powerful because the student's using a solar light, a solar light to study at night under a bed net, which means he's not at risk of the bed net catching on fire. He's not at risk, she's not at risk of indoor air pollution, and she's able to study in the evening. Furthermore, energy poverty can impact GDP per capita in many ways. The top map here is showing GDP PPP per capita on a country scale, or gross domestic product, power purchasing parity per capita. In other words, this is the average annual worth of everything produced in a country divided by its total population, and then adjusted to the purchasing power of the 2011 US dollar, so that everything is on a comparable scale across the world. And as shown in comparing these two maps, the lowest GDP PPP per capita are also the areas affected by energy poverty. And here are a few ways that energy poverty can impact GDP. Traditional fuel like kerosene is expensive, as we talked about before. According to LTBLI international data, solar light recipients report having spent 10 to 25% of their total income on lighting prior to receiving the solar light. Even on the low end, this is a huge expense and sometimes makes other financial ventures inaccessible, like starting a business or improving living conditions. Running a business is also limited by access to lighting. Without reliable lighting, businesses cannot run after dark, which limits the hours available for profit. This image is showing a solar light recipient, Teresa, who's part of the Safe Births and Healthy Homes program. And from the savings from her solar light, she was actually able to start a soda business using the money she no longer spent on kerosene. So the main conclusion shown in the maps is that where there is energy poverty in the forms of lack of access to electricity and clean cooking fuels, there's also economic poverty and other correlated consequences of energy poverty. And energy poverty and economic poverty exist in a feedback loop, which means that they reinforce each other. People in energy poverty cannot afford modern energy services, and vice versa, people in economic poverty cannot improve their situations without access to modern energy services. And this concept is similar to the affordability gap that we were discussing earlier, and similar to the affordability gap and energy safety nets in decreasing the affordability gap. Our thesis concluded that international partnerships are very helpful in breaking this cycle of the feedback loop between energy poverty and economic poverty. So as shown in my thesis, I'm very passionate about awareness on energy poverty, but I'm also passionate about engineering solutions to energy poverty and climate change. I'm currently studying mechanical engineering at Duke University, focusing in energy and fluids with the goal of entering the field of creating technologies for alleviating energy poverty. And engineering is very important in alleviating energy poverty because it leads the way in innovative solutions and development. And the concept of technology transfers is very useful in understanding this. And it's a concept that was coined by the United Nations, and it incorporates Sustainable Development Goals 7 and 13. 7 is affordable and clean energy for everyone. 13 is climate action. So technology transfers recognizes the urgent need to combat climate change, and that energy technologies to do this exist. In their development, developed countries made followed a pattern of transitioning from biomass to fossil fuels and now to renewable energy. A technology transfer is the concept of diffusing low carbon energy technologies that already exist to countries in energy poverty, allowing them to leapfrog the development stage of fossil fuels and go straight from biomass to renewable energy and minimize their impact on climate change. And this is really important, but in a way, it's also necessary. The United States consumes the most energy per capita out of any country. And in 2019, the Global Footprint Network estimated that if everyone in the world consumed energy at the same rate as the average American, using the same fuel sources, we would need 5 Earths to meet everyone's needs. And while the United States should not be used as the ideal model for energy consumption, the message here is clear, and that's that there are not enough fossil fuels on Earth to meet the energy needs of everyone. So to completely eliminate energy poverty, sustainable technologies are necessary. There's also an element of environmental justice to technology transfers. So due to fossil fuel use, developed countries are much more responsible for climate change than developing countries. While energy poverty contributes to climate change in certain ways, as we discussed earlier, the impacts of people in extreme poverty are minimal compared to those in wealthy countries. And while the impacts of people in developing countries are minimal, they are the ones that will bear the brunt of impacts of climate change. And this is because due to limited resources in their communities, they're less resilient to climate effects like floods, droughts like the one shown here in Malawi, and severe storms. And this is a really unfair trade-off. Technology transfers are a solution to this. They encourage sustainable development that will improve resilience and decrease climate change. And for technology transfers to occur, innovative and sustainable technologies that are designed to meet the needs of people in energy poverty are needed. Energy technologies that work for developed countries won't necessarily work for developing countries. For example, in the US, grid infrastructure is expansive and completely interconnected, and a utility scale wind farm would work really well with it. But in a country without that grid infrastructure, a utility scale wind farm wouldn't have anywhere to direct that energy, and something like a distributed microgrid or a community-based generator would be much better suited. And microgrids are actually a technology that I'm very excited about for use in communities affected by energy poverty. Energy poverty is most prevalent in remote rural areas, like this rural community in Kenya. Interconnected grid power is very difficult and expensive to supply to these areas just because they're remote and transmission equipment is very expensive. And due to the affordability gap, people in these communities cannot afford to extend that transmission equipment to their community. And microgrids are a potential solution to this. They're a standalone community-level electric system that include a generator, backup, and control capability. The generator is usually a distributed renewable generator, like the solar photovoltaic shown in this image from Megeta Island in Kenya. And the backup is usually battery storage to account for the intermittent generation of renewable generators, or a diesel backup generator. And microgrids offer several improvements over the conventional interconnected grid. They improve reliability because they're not affected by the blackouts and brownouts of the unreliable interconnected grid. They're also much more cost effective than extending the centralized grid because transmission equipment is very expensive. And without having to build that, the cost of electricity goes way down. Microgrids also pair very well with renewable generators like solar photovoltaics and wind turbines, which decreases community pollution. And distributed renewable generators are also becoming increasingly less expensive, which further drives down the cost of electricity using microgrids. Like every new technology, there are upfront costs that are barriers to development, especially for people living below the affordability gap. But with energy safety nets, international partnerships, and technology transfers, solutions like microgrids can become available. So I want to spend the next few slides discussing LTBLI International's impact, because LTBLI International is one of those valuable international partnerships. So Let There Be Light International is a nonprofit addressing climate change, global health, and energy poverty through three main avenues. The first is donating safe and solar lights to vulnerable families. The second is solar electrifying prioritized off-grid health clinics in low-resource communities. And the third is raising awareness about energy poverty and its impact on global health. This image on the left is of a typical kerosene lamp used for lighting in areas where Let There Be Light International operates. And no one wants to use this light. It's dim, it has an open flame, which is really dangerous. It emits pollutants, and it's really expensive. But for millions, this is the only lighting option available. Let There Be Light International offers a solution to that with solar lights. And the impact over the past 6 years that Let There Be Light International has been operating has been expansive. To name a few numbers, 15,515 solar lights have been donated to vulnerable households, all of which fall into one of these 5 categories, which are mother, orphan, disabled, elderly, or student. And the average household size for a solar light recipient is 5 to 6 people. So not only is the solar light recipient impacted, but their entire household as well. And the solar light offers a lot of solutions to problems. For example, 38% of solar light recipients said a member of their household has been burned by their old kerosene light, and 67% reported that pollution bothered their eyes and breathing. 250 outreach sessions have been conducted in communities affected by energy poverty to raise awareness about the benefits of solar lights. 41 health clinics have been solar electrified, which improves healthcare access, delivery, and outcomes. And also noteworthy, 6 health clinics have been solar electrified since the onset of COVID-19, when reliable healthcare is needed now more than ever. And through all these initiatives, a total of over 650,000 lives have been impacted. And a little light can really go a long way. The solar lights that Let There Be Light International donates are highly successful in alleviating the problems associated with kerosene use for lighting. 98% of recipients report improved health and safety. 100% of recipients use their solar light for schoolwork, reading, and chores. 93% of solar lights are still in use after 1 year. 87% report improved respiratory and eye health. And 74% no longer spend any money on fuel for lighting and are instead spending the savings on school fees, medicine, and basic necessities. And these data points are all made accessible by local partnerships. Let There Be Light International partners are responsible for spreading awareness on energy poverty within their communities and collecting data on solar recipients. And this allows Let There Be Light International to make data-driven decisions. So here's a picture of George Mike, who's our lead education and outreach coordinator in Uganda. He's at an off-grid health center in Uganda. And you can see here that he's using a computer to collect demographic data about the attendees of a health forum. Let There Be Light International also just 2 weeks ago celebrated the launch of their new Safe Births and Healthy Homes website, which provides information about the program and stories of the beneficiaries. Safe Births and Healthy Homes is a program that electrifies health clinics and then donates solars to new mothers who choose to give birth in the health clinics rather than at home. And this program incentivizes attended births, which increases positive outcomes for mothers and infants. It also allows them to improve their health at home with a healthy source of lighting. And since the launch of this program, Safe Births and Healthy Homes has donated roughly 1,300 solar lights to new mothers. And I'll talk more about involvement opportunities later, but we're welcoming partnerships with the new Safe Births and Healthy Homes program. Let There Be Light International also utilizes social media to promote awareness. And as an intern, I've primarily been working on outreach through social media by creating content like this. We use social media to convey collected data from our partners, tell stories of recipients, and then give a voice to people in the field and why it's important. Overall, Let There Be Light International works to create sustainable change for vulnerable people affected by energy poverty. And Let There Be Light International contributes to alleviating energy poverty through getting through the barriers of awareness, affordability, and technology. If you're looking for ways to get involved, there are several ways to do that with Let There Be Light International. You can take action in your own community by raising awareness. Contact Let There Be Light International for materials and information to do that, or hosting a fundraiser. You could also become a Let There Be Light International donor. Just $15 donates solar to a vulnerable family. And a donation of a solar light also offers a 10 times return on investment for that family, purely due to energy expenditures. The typical household spends $150 over 3 years on lighting, and 3 years is the life of a solar light. So altogether, this creates a 10 times return on the $15 invested for the solar light. And the return on investment could be even higher with the profitable avenues that solar lighting opens, but more research is needed to determine that number. Also equally important, follow Let There Be Light International on social media and share our content. It's a very powerful outreach tool. And here's our @ and links. And that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about energy poverty with me today. And I'd like to open it up to questions or comments if anyone has any.